Okay, I guess we can start as, why oil? Like how did the Saudis, why are they so central to this? And so essentially, the elites, since I would say I'd put this point at the beginning of, at the very end of the 19th century, they had decided that they were going to establish a global monopoly on commerce and oil, and money. So one of the strategies that they would use, they wanted to have access to cheap oil. The reason this is important is that if you're going to establish a global market, you need to be able to transport your goods from one position to the next, one country to the next. You need cheap oil to do that. And so you'll have you might shop around from one country to the next to find the cheapest labor. So this agenda was established at the end of the 19th century, and then we can go into the world wars where the Saudis they were recognized as having unlimited supplies of oil. I mean, there was just so much there that could last for generations. The British had control of the Saudi government, a lot of influence. And so they needed to determine, okay, how can we take that oil and then apply it to this agenda that they were launching upon the world?
I've heard I'm trying to find the book. That's why I was on my computer. But there's a book out there that I read before, and it broke down that like the Saudis before they were the House of Saud, they were a nomad culture.
Correct.
They were nomadic, and the international banking cabal, we'll call it, discovered oil reserves in Saudi Arabia. And because these guys were basically farmers, right? They kind of made a deal with this international banking cabal, and you correct me if I'm wrong, Susan, that they made a deal, and this was the international bankers did. They made a deal. They go, listen, we're going to set up the whole apparatus to extract your oil. And this is, you just got to agree to a couple things. And they go, you can charge anything you want for oil. We don't care. Whatever you want to charge, you can charge. It's not, you got to agree to a couple things. One, you have to put all of your money into our banks. And
so no matter how much they charge, it's coming back to me anyways.
Yeah, but it's very interesting because they kind of played the Saudis a little bit too, which kind of trapped them. And then I'd love to hear Susan's thoughts on this, is that they go, you have to invest, you have to put your money in our banks, and you have to you have to invest in America. Those are the two things. They go, agree, they don't know. They signed a 50-year fixed deposit, meaning they have to leave their money in the bank for 50 years. And because these guys are nomads, they don't know what they're signing. They're just like, yeah, let's go. So anyways, long story. So Susan, when suddenly something happens somewhere on the planet and gas goes up $1, they're like, we had that. It's all bullshit. It's all complete BS, because most of the oil the gas we're pumping right now is oil that was pumped a year ago, way long ago. It's gone through the refinery. It doesn't affect that. It's kind of like when you go to a restaurant and they F up your food and you're like, this food isn't good. They bring back new food and then they charge you more money for the new. Like, no, you made the mess up. But super interesting. What are your thoughts on all that, Susan?
Yeah, that's true, Sam. And the World Bank sets the price of oil on the world market, and so Saudi Arabia is the World Bank's development partner, so they can determine how high or how low the price of oil is at any point. And you're right that they got swindled in a way, because they were told to essentially buy dollars, and then buy gold, and of course, the City of London can raise and lower the price of gold. So whenever the Saudis needed to buy gold, the price would go up. When they wanted to sell it, the price would go down. And so the cabal, as you've identified them, was always in control. Like, they always were able to come out ahead in every deal.
Dude, I never even thought about that. If you control the gold, you control the price. And if somebody wants to buy a big chunk, you raise the price up. And if somebody wants to sell a big chunk, you lower the price. And it's very weird, because I don't know if you've seen the guy in Argentina. Have you heard this story? Where he just shipped like 48 billion, some insane amount of gold out of Argentina without telling anybody.
Why?
Nobody knows. He won't tell them where it is or why he did it.
The state gold? Like,
Look
it's
it
owned
up.
by the
Look
state?
it up.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's super interesting. So what happens is they get the Saudis to invest in America, and a big thing to do is they bought farmland, right? It's all interwoven. It's all
One big
interwoven.
network.
So why don't we get into why is oil important to globalism?
So oil was the means through which they could move products around. Like they wanted to have a global supply chain, and so if oil is very cheap, then you can kind of ship products around. So ultimately, their objective was to have a global market that operate beyond the reach of the federal government. So you'd have our government, United States, give billions of dollars in development aid to foreign countries. That money would wind up in the hands of dictators who would hold on to it. They would enrich themselves, but they would also establish monopolies within those markets. And you might have one company produce one part, another company produce a different part, and they would ship these different parts around the world cheaply, ensuring that these individuals and these networks held a global monopoly. But the only way this works is if oil is cheap and you can control the price of oil, and that's where this petrodollar comes into place, where they wanted to make sure that they controlled the price of oil, they controlled the petrodollar, and that the United States was on the hook to print unlimited amounts of money for to develop the world. And I think, as we discussed earlier, the World Bank is the development partner of Saudi Arabia. So this was like one big kind of global infrastructure that they had, and an apparatus that they'd set up to establish a global monopoly on commerce.
Buy all their oil, even though America produces more oil than Saudi Arabia.
We do.
It's so crazy to me.
And we're not even allowed to develop our own oil. We even have, I think, oil in Alaska and other places that we actually ship to China. And China's supposed to be our strategic adversary. And then I think in 2020, or maybe it was 2017, I don't remember the exact date, but Donald Trump actually sold our largest oil processing facility in Texas to the Saudis.
Unbelievable.
It's not even in our interests. Global warming, they had the Kyoto protocols, which they had like a universal consensus on global warming. What was it determined by? It was determined by the universities and think tanks, which are funded by the government. The governments are controlled by Rothschild, and this was at the point where they were kind of phasing out the petrodollar. Now all of a sudden they've got global warming. That's like the scientific, and the consensus was like, in the days gone by, you could never question the Bible. It was infallible. Now you have to trust the science. You can't question what the think tanks tell you.
Currency. And a really weird thing that Trump did, which bought him a lot of credibility with Americans, was that he got us out of the Paris Climate Accord. Which was just the Club of Rome's way of just siphoning money off America to destroy our economy, while giving China and India free reign to do whatever they want to. Because this is what they do. This is what the globalists do. They build up an empire, then they destroy an empire, and they just keep moving everything around till they get us to a point where they have us we're in a complete and utter feudal system that's under complete and utter, like, their technological control. Like, that's what I believe is happening for sure.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. And I think that his withdrawal from the climate accords, I think that was more political, because according to like what they had agreed, any government can withdraw at any time, or it's you only can go as far as your people or your nation will allow you to go. So if it makes sense for you to withdraw, then you can pull back, and then you can 2 steps back, maybe 3 steps forward, the next day. But by locking us down during COVID, he advanced this Green New Deal. He was, so I think that he was maybe still in on the plan, though he left the impression that he was working on behalf of the people. Oh,
can you explain that a little bit more? So what by getting out of it, he's still a part of the Green New Deal?
Yes. So like part of the parameters that they had established were that you go at your own pace. So they don't want to lock people in, because they think if you're too rigid, one country or another might not be able to meet their goals. So you only go as far as you're able to, but you're still committed to the wider objective. And once the petrodollar was determined to be on borrowed time, the oil community came up with a plan. This was during the Bush administration on what they would do to kind of respond to the crisis. And what they decided was, okay, look, we only have a limited amount of oil, that was connected to the Saudis. What we're going to do with it is we are going to kind of use that for our own means to, for our own development, but we've got to scale down society. So that meant that, that you'd have to drive less, maybe work from home. You'd have to globalize food production, or you'd have to reverse the globalization of food production. But they wanted to have a globalized control. So instead of going back to local farming, they're now talking about creating lab meat, or having a different type of way in which they don't have to kind of send products around the world, because they don't have that oil at their disposal anymore. So they're kind of like scaling back society, and pushing, electric cars and instead of gas-powered cars, even though we don't have the infrastructure in place, to support all these electric cars. So, but it's that precise agenda that they had set, that for how to respond to the petrodollar, and that's what was implemented during the Trump administration.
We have been discussing this on the show, that how like all these videos of horrible flying experiences is all part of what Susan's talking about right now. They don't want you flying. If they want you in a 15-minute city, why would they want you flying?
Makes sense. Yeah.
They want you to be so miserable flying that you decide not to fly. And it's this whole thing. So like we just talked about my friend who came to my show, who I knew her as a little girl. She went to Berkeley. She came to the comedy show. And, if you talk to people out of Berkeley, they'll be like, dude, they're giving business licenses to anybody for anything as long as they agree to get rid of the parking. That you can't park anywhere. So you can't own a car. Where are you going to park your car if there's no parking spots? And this is the movement out to stop us from moving around and just putting us in this small location and saturating us with propaganda.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And now they're making like homeownership almost unaffordable. I'm hearing about property taxes and insurance that is just astronomical. And so in turn, people are not able to afford their homes, and they're being forced by default to move into, or they would like, I guess the elites would like to have them forced by default to move into these smart 15-minute cities because they'll be more affordable.
Yeah. And it's just like control you, lock you down.
So USAID was an organization that was created by John F. Kennedy, and that enabled us to funnel public funds into the organization to then develop the world. And so once we had the petrodollar, a fiat currency backed by oil, we could then funnel billions of dollars to different countries, essentially developing those countries and enabling this clique to establish monopolies within them. And these are the people now who are the billionaires and, the oligarchs. So we're developing, we're essentially enriching them at our own expense, and we're left holding the debt.
So you put us on the petrodollar. Our money is backed by the dollar. They've nationalized Saudi oil. Okay. And then we see an overproduction of oil wells, and this causes profits to drop. So how do you stop that? You basically damage you just kind of take out the fields, which stops the production of oil. Is that what you're saying? When
the Saudis decided to nationalize their oil wells, they were going to push the Rockefellers out. And given that these people are very greedy, they decided, like, look, we're going to get every last drop of profit we can out of these wells before we leave. And so they overproduced the wells. And by overproducing the wells, they damaged them. And so what happened is that there was some type of water or mixture that then was introduced into the production lines, and that degraded the quality of oil. And that ensured that the system that they had set up with the petrodollar would no longer be viable for the long term. And that's when they began to talk about, about sustainable development and climate change, and how we now have to scale back because that fuel that we thought was going to be there was no longer available.
And that hurts the dollar.
Correct.
And then everything, and again, to me, they're talking about who's the big Warren Buffett, right? They're talking about Warren Buffett is trying to tank the economy. And what do we say? How he says all the time, best time to buy is when the economy is tanking.
Yeah.
But
He's
now
famous for that.
imagine if you had billions of dollars. You could buy up so much more.
Well, and he's in cash right now. It seems like he's prepping for a recession, is what it seems
So
like.
he has a lot of cash. We're saying, right?
he's got money sidelined, waiting to put it into the markets. It seems.
Just sitting there waiting after they controlled demolition everything.
Yeah, I mean, he sold some Apple, which is unusual for him. He's usually
His
Very.
residents did
deep
too.
in Apple.
So liquidating his assets.
So keep an eye on him if you're trying to invest.
Yeah. We always follow Warren Buffett. So where does BRICS come into this whole thing, in your opinion?
So BRICS was a way of dealing with the decline of the petrodollar. So we're told in the media that this is a fairly new development, but BRICS, which was called BRIC back then, Brazil, Russia, India, China, was a new common market that they were trying to create an alliance. But this was being established for the development of the third world. So it wasn't meant to be an alternative to the U.S. dominated system, but it was a way for them to kind of realign away from the petrodollar to develop those countries. And of course, recently Saudi Arabia has joined BRICS, as and BRICS now has South Africa involved. So BRICS is about global development. These major countries like Saudi Arabia, which have trillions in their sovereign fund, Russia and China have large sovereign funds where they can now invest in these developing countries and then ensure that the global elite can, establish monopolies and develop commerce within those countries that they control. But it's more geared at the developing countries.
Is there something deeper than just the oil? Is it possible that oil is a front to something deeper, which is these dark Satan Babylonian sorcerers wanting to destroy the history of our world, destroy these holy places? Anything like that?
Well, I'll address that two ways. For the last question that you asked, I think that's true. Just if you study their pattern throughout history, they always destroy the culture, the relics, the statues, and the history of the people. But they hoard that knowledge within themselves. But then they destroy the people's sense of who they are, their own personal and cultural histories, so that they can then remake them in the image that they want or reinvent those histories. But I think the reason why they will not allow us to develop our oil is they want us dependent, so they can control the price of oil, who has it, how much we get, control the gold, and control the monetary supply, and then they kind of pull the different aspects of the economy on strings, and then we end up being beholden to them, where we are dancing to their tune, and we're not operating as a sovereign nation.
Yeah, I think they're trying to just again controlled demolition this place from inside, get us so reliant on everywhere else that if anything, any kind of connection breaks, the whole system just get out of whack, and our economy crashes. And when you study what our military did with free trade, which was go into these countries and go, hey, if you let us put military base here, we'll let you have a free trade agreement with America, but you could tariff our goods. The elites have been working against us the whole time.
Yes, they have.
The elites have been working against us the whole time.
Yes, they have.
I know we can't have you much longer, but real quick, what are your thoughts on Zionism, its role in like JFK assassination, any of these other conspiracies? And it just seems like they seem to be almost at every single conspiracy.
They are. I think that there is a historic Zionism, and according to biblical prophecy, the Jews were promised their own homeland, though that may have been a new vintage from the Schofield Bible. But I think that the Jews were always expected to have their own kingdom someday. But this would be a kingdom that was developed by God. By their divine providence. And I think that the Rothschilds hijacked the Zionist destiny. They took over, and we discussed this before, the British Crown. The British Crown was a defender of the Christian faith, not only within England but throughout Europe and the world. They took over the crown. They eliminated the Christian monarchs, destroyed the Christian Europe and the Christian governmental structures to implant a type of satanic regime in its place. And I think Zionism is really about using the pretext that the destiny that the Jews were meant to have as God's people, and
Yes.
Christians are also God's people, for themselves, to establish the seat of government in Israel under Rothschild, and then ultimately to have the Rothschild appoint the leader who would then serve at the seat of government throughout the world. So I think it is a Rothschild Zionist conspiracy. I don't see it as a Jewish conspiracy, but it is a conspiracy that has been acknowledged by the Rothschilds themselves to establish a global dictatorship. And I think they operate through Zionism to achieve that dictatorship. And as we've discussed also, on different shows, you can trace the bloodlines and the commercial relationships back to the Vatican. The Vatican merchants worked with the Khazarian, Mongolian, Turkish mercenaries who are very bloodthirsty. These were the people who were the Bolsheviks, who committed terrible atrocities against the Russian people, and who I think are creating fomenting a lot of dissent within our country. So it's a different type of mindset. I don't think they're the Jews, but it's an agenda that is being led by Rothschild that is very much against Judeo-Christian Europe and is trying to implant itself as God's temporal authority on earth.
So one more time, can you please tell them where they can find your book and anything else you would like to promote?
Well, thank you so much again for having me. So my website is susanbradford.org. I would encourage your audience to get the Saudi Swindle, because that book documents how they set up this vast money laundering apparatus to essentially redistribute our assets to themselves. So I think it's important for you to know how they're trying to set this up and where the agenda is going. And I would also encourage your audience, if they're interested, to follow me on my Substack, which you can link through my website, susanbradford.org. And I try to break, news on the mechanics, the machinations, and behind the elite, to inform you of what they're doing, the thought process behind it, the money and the agenda behind it, so that you can be empowered with knowledge and reclaim your freedoms with that knowledge. So that's my goal. And I'd love for your audience to join me there if they're interested.